Today's guest is someone whose work genuinely shifted the way I see both nature and what it means to be human. I'm incredibly honored to welcome Dr. Brittany Jane Laidlaw to the podcast. Brittany is a somatic ecologist, eco-philosopher, rewilding mentor, and one of Australia's pioneer researchers in the emerging field of ecosomatics. Her work explores the profound relationship between the body and the living world, showing that our well-being and the well-being of the earth are deeply intertwined. She completed groundbreaking doctoral research in this field following a master's degree in environment, and her leadership has been recognized with honors, including the inaugural Westpac Future Leaders Award, the Prime Minister's Endeavour Award, and representing Australia at the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. She's also the co-founder of Wild Song, has guided hundreds of people through transformative nature-based experiences, and many people will know her from her surviving 21 days on Naked and Afraid, where she demonstrated a radically different philosophy of living with nature rather than conquering it. What struck me most wasn't just Brittany's knowledge, it was her way of seeing the world. This conversation challenges assumptions I'd held for years and opened entirely new ways of thinking about grief, the body, consciousness, ecology, mythology, and our place within the natural world. I genuinely walked away changed, and I think many of you will too. Hello, Brittany. Thank you so much for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm actually in Belgium traveling with my work at the moment, so I'm very good and enjoying the summer heat here, which is actually very unusual for this region of the world.
That's amazing. Definitely a nice escape from the Australian winter, which has been very cold.
Yeah, well, here I think it's even colder. I think they get snow in the winter, so everyone's reveling in the sunshine and planting their flowers, and it's really beautiful to see everyone loving it outside.
That is amazing. I love, and for you, especially with your line of work, I'm sure that you're soaking up the outdoor weather.
Totally.
For anybody who doesn't know about you or hasn't heard of your work already, can you give the audience just a little bit of a run through of what you do and what you specialize in?
Sure. So my name is Dr. Brittany Jane. I'm a somatic ecologist, and I've just completed my PhD in a topic called ecosomatics. And ecosomatics brings together the worlds of deep ecology, which sees the natural world as animate, as living, as conscious, and something that we're all connected within. So we're just part of this wide ecology, and just like the bees and the birds and the whales and the sharks, we have a role within that ecology. So it takes deep ecology and merges that with a field called somatics, which is all about the body as a source of wisdom, as a source of navigating our way in the world. A lot of people kind of are more familiar with somatics as it's starting to rise as a kind of healing focus. And so ecosomatics brings these two fields together and says the way in which we understand our relationship and our place within and our purpose within the animate conscious earth is through our bodies, is through embodied practice. And so my research looks at, specifically it looked at dance, but broadly it looked at how we use the body as a means of connection and experiencing a level of connection to the natural world that I don't think most people are even aware exists. Like I've had so many experiences where people have done my work and they say, oh, wow, this is like I'm on psychedelics, or I've taken something to experience this kind of connectivity. And it's like, no, you have these pathways in your own body. This level of connection is innate to human beings. And so I'm just kind of waking up and helping people remember that.
Brittany, that's incredible. I think that is that's so amazing, especially the surprise or the shock and awe factor. Especially just hearing you talk, I know that this doesn't seem to be the common knowledge in mainstream education or media. Um, what do you think is some of the biggest surprises for people when you kind of deliver more information about somatics and um, connection to body and nature?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest surprises for me when I started this work, and I think it's across the board as well, is I didn't realize that our capacity to connect actually has a tangible impact on the health of the landscape. This is actually something that I researched. And it's not just that connecting makes us feel good, which of course it does, But when I worked with a lot of Indigenous communities and elders and had the deep privilege of sitting and learning, and of course, I can only have this sliver of understanding of some of the knowledge that was offered to me. But what I learned in that process was that our practices of embodied connection, like doing ceremony, doing dancing on the land, singing, coming together as a community, this wasn't actually just something that makes humans feel good. Of course it does, but actually the vibration and the energy that is generated by that, and the what I called like the mythic embodiment of certain animate forces in the landscape, it actually supports the health of the landscape itself. And in the kind of modern Western mindset, they're like, what? What do you mean by that? And that was my reaction when I first kind of came across this concept, that actually our dancing on the land actually supports the health of the land. I'm getting a little trying to reconnect signal.
Yeah, I saw it. I'll just do this to edit for later. Yeah, it disconnected a little bit, but I probably still picked up on what you said, because we're still logged in, so that's good. This is
Okay.
incredibly interesting. Was that point done, or did you have more to add to that part? That was so interesting.
Yeah. I'll add a little bit more. My Wi-Fi is kind of going. Of course, it's like the one day that we've had an issue, but it is the one day that it's been overcast. So I'm like, maybe it's that. But
I know,
yeah,
and it's coming out. Yeah,
I was
if you
saying
want to
that.
carry on. Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that when I first came across that idea that dancing and doing ceremony and singing on the land like this isn't just of benefit to us, it's actually a benefit to the land. That totally was like it threw out my whole worldview and inspired my entire research. And that's really what I did my PhD in. And I found that things like dance and other embodied practice isn't just something we do for fun. It's actually part of our custodial role to the earth. And that's something that I don't think the modern world has really wrapped their head around, because it took me 4.5, 5 years to really understand that in my own research.
And you've concised it and articulated it wonderfully. Wow,
Thank you.
what an incredible, that's such incredible knowledge, and that's so powerful. Especially, you've just shifted my perspective even, and it's prompted me to ask more about your perspective on where we are as a society, especially, I guess we could speak more to the Western world. What is the difference between a healthy land where people are aware of their custodial responsibilities, dancing on the land, participating with, connecting to the land and to themselves, versus our society maybe in a more urban setting? What are the differences you'll see in your studies more on the ecology side of things and the human side of things?
Yes, it's a great question. So I think the number one difference that I would say in between cultures that I say who have this kind of ecosomatic, more animistic relationship to the natural world and have the benefits of that revealed in the actual health and vitality of the landscape is the worldview of animism versus more what I would call like a mechanistic worldview. And so many cultures around the world, what we would describe as like more earth-centric or indigenous cultures that have a really deep relationality to the land, underpinning most of those cultures. I'm not going to say all, because I have not researched every single culture in the world, but to my knowledge, have this underpinning worldview of animism, which is that nature is not just a backdrop. It's not just unconscious, inanimate objects filling a space. Every single being in that ecology is an animate, conscious, living presence. It's like a person that you can connect with and may not use language in the same way that we humans have language, but it is still a conscious presence nonetheless. And now there's lots of cool research coming out about, how trees communicate, how myceliums is actually the most intelligent force on the planet. And so there's more and more research coming out, which is offering a more scientific lens to this concept of animism. But what I found is that cultures who still maintain that worldview of animism, and I say maintain because it is actually something that's fundamentally human. It's just most of the modern world has lost this worldview through often a lot of displacement, a lot of colonization and things like this. But all of our ancestors came from animate-oriented cultures. This is our normative consciousness. And we've only not had it for a tiny, tiny blip in modern world. And so, but cultures who maintain that, they understand that those dances, those songs, those ceremonies are not something we just thought up. They were gifted to us as the custodians, as the kind of managers, as the keepers of balance. They were gifted to us by those animate forces, by the mountains beings, or by the tree beings, or by the river. And it was our role to sing them up in the same way that if a person gave you their name and said, "Oh, my name is Bella," and I just ignored you and never called you by your name, never offered you. Our soul, naturally, we know that. It shrinks. It's like, oh, nobody sees me. Nobody loves me. Nobody feels connected to me, or I don't feel connected to anybody. These animate presences in the land are exactly the same. And so we call them by their name. We sing their songs. We dance their dances. And in that process, they maintain their vitality alongside us because those things make us also feel vital. And so I think without that animist worldview, without understanding, that idea that the land is animate and we have a responsibility, a kinship responsibility to those beings through these embodied practices, without that, we kind of a slippery slope into deep separation. And that's where we are, I think, as a modern culture. And the land reflects that, just like a human would grow dull and lose their sparkle, let's say, like the land actually loses its vitality as well. The land gets sick in that way.
And we are seeing evidence of that for sure. It's a great lens and a great perspective to have a little more insight as to, because it makes a lot of sense. So it's definitely a whole new perspective that I think is not widely discussed enough. In terms of, just to give people a bit of a context of how quickly you can notice the impact of connection when you start to interact with nature, can you, based on the kind of workshops and retreats you run where you're bringing people out into nature and you're kind of working with people for a period of time to reconnect to the earth, can you tell us a little bit about how quickly we can reconnect? Is it something like you go out into nature and Dr. Brittany tells you, touch the tree, roll on the floor, and there you go, you're connected? Or does it take a bit of time, or is it a bit of a process to like fully retether ourselves to that symbiotic relationship where we're both benefiting and livening up, as you say?
Well, I think that there's never going to be too much time out in the wild. And so there's always more. Like I always offer my retreats around 10 days, like 8 to 10 days, because there is a particular type of magic that happens after that 8-day mark. There's a kind of a saying in the wilderness connection space about, you're only 4 days deep between, like you're 4 days away from that level of connection, because they say that you actually need 4 days of full immersion before actually that kind of modern egoic self or the illusory self starts to crack a little bit. But I often notice that shift really again over 8 days. But without kind of putting a time frame on it, I have found without a doubt that every time people come, it's not that, it's just about rolling on the grass. There are very trainable somatic skills that you can use and that I teach people to turn back on this level of connectivity. And it's literally just waiting right there. And the biggest feedback that I have often is like, oh, wow, I used to have this as a child, but I kind of shut it down. Or, oh, this actually feels so much more natural. It's like, yes, your body remembers this. This is actually the design of your body. And it's far more about peeling off the layers that got put on top than it is about adding all of these specific things in. Your body remembers exactly how to do this. And so my experience is like, when I guide people in these exercises, they have these very, very swift, actually, experiences of radical connection. And as I said, there's always more, like there's always deeper. That's why I'm always fascinated, because even in my experience after doing this for 10 years, I'm like, oh, wow, there's a whole nother layer even still. But people are really surprised because I work with a whole range of people, but predominantly the people that I work with haven't come from strongly identified Indigenous lineages, or at least knowing those lineages. And so I think in their mindset, they said, oh, I can't experience this. Like I'm not connected to those lineages. That isn't available to me. I'm like, no, this is deeply human. This is actually something that's deeply human. And it's something that you can actually train in a matter of a week. And obviously then going home and practicing these skills in real life where you're not, immersed in nature every day. And that's where the skill development really comes in. But yeah, I've always had profound results when working with the people that I do. And I think that also just naturally comes. I'm very humble in the fact that I know that, yeah, I'm giving them these tools, but actually immersing them in an animate landscape and having them sleeping on the earth, sitting around the fire, like gazing at the fire, sleeping under the stars. Like when you do that for 10 days and have that as an immersive experience in community, there's a magic that unfolds that I cannot claim that I am responsible for. There's actually just something innately human that wakes up in everybody when you do that. And she does the work. She's actually the master in this realm. And it's kind of, I often say that partly most of my job is just getting people outside and getting people on camps.
That's incredible. I love that. It's such powerful work, because I think so many of us are feeling disconnected but a little unsure why. And I feel like the question's been asked time and time again. I'm working in the mental health space at the moment, like for the last 3 years, and it is a question that keeps coming up. And then we have all the psychologists and the doctors and everybody, all the specialists. But funnily enough, this doesn't come up once. So it's funny how disconnected we really are. Could you give us this is crazy, and I think this is a big new idea for possibly a lot of people. Could you give an example of a side effect or something that happens physiologically when you are going through an immersive experience,
Totally.
the ones you guide people through?
Totally. And I'm so glad you said that about the mental health space too, by the way, because this is a huge missing factor, is that our human brain evolved in this animate context and evolved within a context where we were constantly immersed in community, for one, like a human community, but we were also held within this network of more than human, which is like another word for the ecology, like ecological kinship networks. And so everybody knew who their totem was, or who their clan animal was, or what ecology was, their place, knew what was in season. These things are the context through which our brain actually developed, through which our psyche was born. And the loss of those, I don't think people have a grasp the impact of the mental health impacts of that loss of connection. And, we treat mental health conditions as a really isolated issue. Like we look at purely at the individual, but we don't have any context for what's the network that this person is actually held within or not. What are even the unseen forces? This is something that was also talked about for all cultures. We weren't just looking at the matter, at the physical person. We were also examining what are the unseen forces. What are the realms of the more than human that we've kind of forgotten about in modern culture that have a very real impact on a human being. And that's something that kind of like science is like, oh, that's a little bit out there. But there are now fields that actually are looking at this and validating it. And I think a lot of the incredible Indigenous scholars are also talking about this and bringing this to the forefront and saying, well-being is not an individual matter. It's not an individual matter. It's a much bigger scope. And so thank you for bringing that. But in terms of the tangible impacts, is that my experience is the level of sensitivity we are incredibly sensitive beings and very sensual beings. Our sensuality is actually our primary gateway of connection to the earth. And it's something that's been incredibly shamed because it's been linked with sexuality. The two things are incredibly different. Sensuality is the capacity to engage with the world through our senses. But most of modern society is incredibly numbed out. And so a big part of the work that I do is resensitizing our human body, which again is far more about peeling off all the layers and all the beliefs and all of the programs that have got put on us that make us feel like that's not okay. And kind of like waking up our sensory capacity. And my experience, that can happen very swiftly. These are known pathways within the body that we just have to exercise and practice again. So, for example, one of the exercises that I guide people in is around reshaping the way that we use our vision. At the moment in our kind of modern society, we use a lot more of a tunnel-focused vision. Think about looking at your phones. We're very, very specific and targeted in the way that we see. But our eyes evolved not to be in this kind of targeted vision. That is something that we used probably like 1 to 2% of the time when we're locking in a target, and we're hunting or something like that, or we're looking for our children. But most of the time we are supposed to be in something called wide angle vision, which is like a wide peripheral gaze. This softens our perspective. This enables us to actually open our sensory field to become more sensitive to things that are happening in our spatial area. But it also turns on our body's sensitivity to particular information coming in. What's now cool in science, they're showing that actually doing that, going into a more soft gaze, the eyes are related to our vagal nerve, which, a lot of people in the nervous system space are all about vagal toning and vagal exercises because it's responsible for shifting on or off or having an influence in our parasympathetic versus our sympathetic, like in our fight or flight or our resting awareness state. And so just shifting our gaze and actually working that as a practice helps to be able to support people to know how to work with their physiology so they can essentially come out of this very closed state of being where their energetic body is closed. They're kind of numb and desensitized. And as a result, they feel incredibly alone, don't belong in this world, very isolated, to just little small somatic skills that you can start implementing that actually open up your sensory field, relax your own body. Even in somatic world, they call this orienting sometimes, but these are little tools that help us open ourselves to the connections that are available. And, that is among a slew of things that I kind of stack for people over the course of working with them. And the biggest result people say is, that they have this, as I said, level of sensual, sensitive connection that was in their bodies all along. It was just about kind of flipping a switch, be like, okay, just make this little tweak and make this little tweak. And then they go, oh my gosh, this is wild. And what we're doing in that process too, we're also creating new kind of neural pathways where we're creating new ways of being, new ways of inhabiting our body. And sometimes that takes a bit more practice and time to kind of really put in that new groove, but it's a very tangible outcome that everybody is experiencing. And as a result, not so much on the physical, but psychological, one of the most amazing things that I never get tired of hearing, I think a lot of people are actually quite afraid of going out in nature, especially by themselves, especially overnight. Lots of people are actually afraid of going camping by themselves. And I understand that, we live in a pretty crazy world at the moment, but for other reasons, they're like afraid of what if something's coming to get me? What if this? What if that? And I will just never get tired of the amount of times that I've supported people who are absolutely terrified, because I know that pathway myself, having overcome it. Then returning from a night solo in the bush, as we call it in Australia, and saying, oh my gosh, I wasn't afraid. And that's because they've engaged these somatic skills to realize that, oh my gosh, we are at home in nature. We don't have to be closed and scared and activating our own fight or flight responses. We can actually soften and be incredibly available for connection and being held. And yeah, people report just this incredible feeling of being at home again and how transformative that is. I don't think people, it's hard to describe unless you've experienced it, but many, many people return just tears streaming down their face, just being like, oh my gosh, I feel at home. Because I think that's a massive modern plague too, is nobody feels that they belong here or even belong on this planet, even belong in this life, let alone belong to a place. And to have that shift in us is quite profound. It's actually quite transformative and life-changing for many, many people who have felt like they're not supposed to be here or that they don't belong here for a very long time.
Wow. Thank you for that. That's so important. And I think that's really helpful for people to hear right now, because that could be people are looking for a solution or a saving grace or for someone to come and save them. And I feel like information like this is capable of saving a lot of people. And I speak from personal experience. The connection to nature is crazy, but I've never had the opportunity to work with someone like yourself, integrating ecology with somatic experiences and workshops as well, which I think is incredible. And I want to ask you about um, is there some kind of does the connection to nature and an individual um, work in the way where nature can actually train or teach you? If you were to spend enough time out in the woods or the bush alone, would you actually start to just transform and start to pick up and realize and learn things about how to survive or how to live in tune with nature without anyone telling you?
100%. So my entire body of work has come through sitting in nature, has come through just observing and just like witnessing. And something that I do have as kind of a strong innate skill is pattern recognition. And so I'm constantly sitting and observing, and all of my work, all the practices, like all the frameworks have been absolutely gifted to me from my times just sitting and being with the land in that way. And as I said, I'm humble enough to go, like, I know that I'm not really doing a lot of the work. Like most of the transformative experiences, we have all these kind of like crazy practices and things like that in the modern spirituality, healing, etc. world, and these frameworks. But in honesty, the most transformative practice that I've ever come across is just getting people to sit in nature. That's it. Like there's nothing fancy about it. There's no like stand on your head and turn around 3 times. Like it's like, no, just go and sit. No distractions, no phone, no journal, no nothing. Just go sit. And probably for the first 20 minutes, half an hour, maybe longer if you're kind of more immersed in that urban life, is that you'll notice all the mind chatter, blah, 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 blah. But then it starts to soften because you realize, okay, well, I'm out there for a while. And suddenly, and especially when stacked with these skills that I then give people, which are really small tweaks, as I said, but even without those, you start to have encounters and you start to have these levels of communication that are incredibly transformative. And when do we ever do that? When do we ever just go sit in nature for 1 hour at least with no distractions, no photos, no nothing? It doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. And it can be really confronting at first. It's the first practice I get when I run camps and in-person programs. It's the first thing I get people to do is go sit on the land for an hour by themselves. And I remember myself as well, actually, was quite resistant to this. And I don't know if it was just because my mind was like, surely there's something more, complex and blah, blah. And I noticed that a resistance sometimes in people too, because it's the part of us that's so used to going so fast or having things be so complicated. And in reality, most of us actually can experience radical transformation just by sitting in nature for an hour. Yeah. And she does all the work. She'll show you, she'll reveal. Like if you're humble enough to go and just sit with her, she will hold us like a mother and teach us. And that's been my experience every time, and the experience of all my participants. It's like usually the practice that they're like, that was it for me.
That sounds beautiful. I definitely love and have experienced nature slowing things down for me. And you definitely do start to sync up with the peace and the pace of nature when you do spend enough time out there. But I want to ask you what your thoughts are around people who spend a lot of time in nature and kind of attune themselves to the slower pace of nature. What are some of the worries or concerns about teaching people how to reconnect with nature and then chucking them back in the fast-paced work environment, home environment, city life kind of vibe? What happens? What are the worries there?
That's a great question. And I actually tell people this is I'm running a course at the moment, an online course, and get people to do this work, but they take it off into their own lives, obviously, and do it as homework.
Mm.
And I actually tell people this is that as we start to open our sensory capacity and really de-numb ourselves, like decalcify our senses, and start to wake up this level of sensitivity to, yes, to the physical world, but even to the unseen world, I actually offer a kind of warning and say, look, you will start to become aware of what's dissonant. You know, when we say, oh, something's really resonant, but also when things are dissonant. And people report often to me, oh my gosh, like I have to be under those fluorescent lights at work every day. And I'm actually really struggling a lot more than I normally was. And I do give people a warning because I say you will start to become very aware of what is dissonant, what is not actually supportive to the vitality of your essence. And sorry, not sorry, but the reason why you were able to survive in those environments is because you were numbing out, because you desensitized. And so that's not to say that there's a right and a wrong choice, but now you get the sovereign choice of what do you choose for yourself? Do you want to consciously like numb and choose those environments? And I'm not saying that it's so black and white either. We can absolutely maintain our radiance in those environments. Like now I feel confident to be able to go anywhere. I'm not shy of going anywhere. I absolutely know what makes me feel good and vital and what versus what still feels a little bit clunky. But I'm not so fragile that I have to like, oh my God, I can't be in those kinds of places. I do have a choice of where I choose to put myself. So it's not so black and white in that. But when you're starting out, absolutely, I would tell people, sorry, this may mean that you have to live closer to nature. Sorry, this might mean that you have to change your lifestyle a little bit. And honestly, it's so true that the only reason that that's what's upholding this entire way of being is people's numbness, is people's disassociation, is people's disembodiment. As people start to become more embodied, that is, they're inhabiting their own physical human body, they're starting to inhabit their own primary ecology. As we start to do that, the systems that we have in place now, the ways of being, cannot uphold themselves. They are relying on people's disassociation and numbness and disembodiment to stay alive. And as people start to kind of, for lack of a better term, wake up and come home to themselves, they're like, oh my gosh, I don't want that anymore. This is how we actually migrate the culture, is actually becoming embodied again. Because yeah, as I said, I also want to support people. That's not to say that suddenly you can turn your whole life around, but I've had many people start to make changes because they become aware and they can't just keep ignoring them anymore. And I definitely support people to start making those integrated changes when they get home, because it can be quite a stark contrast. And ironically, the thing that actually most people comment on is, yes, of course, the connection and what feels dissonant, but it's actually the community. So many people, when they go home from these programs, consistently comment on, wow, I didn't realize how much I was actually missing community, like really like functional, healthy community, not kind of like, bickering, like all the stuff that sometimes shows up with, because I work a lot with women and stuff that shows up and sometimes when women relate to each other, but like really healthy sisterhood and community. That's the thing that people are like, wow, I had no idea actually how much I was needing or missing that. And that can be the hard part as well. That's the part that I was like, I encourage people to actually then pursue, okay, well, what does that look like to bring that into your life? What does that look like to bring village back in? That's beyond my capacity in terms of being able to facilitate that. At this time, I'd love to have a bit of land where we can all be like, yeah, just come and be part of our village for sure. But yeah, that's the piece that I think is a big human wound at the moment, is we're so used to living in village, and particularly living in village closely connected to nature and having that as a priority. So that's something that I'll absolutely support till the cows come home, people to establish in their lives. But it's probably the most difficult part, I would say.
Yeah, that's I've definitely noticed that, a craving for community, and definitely as my communities or the people I know shift into more nature goers, there's definitely a greater demand for community and creating that village that you're talking about. When if we're talking about people who are in the city who don't have access to the bush or nature, what is your perspective on these urban designs, these urban parklands, where the trees are not native and the plants aren't native? There's a lot of like landscaped, planted nature. If that's all people have access to, does it have a similar effect, or is that largely disconnected from real nature?
No,
For
I
lack of
understand
a better
what you mean.
term.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. Is that the way I've come to understand it? Because I don't want anyone to feel like they're missing out. Although, yes, if it feels true that eventually those environments become dissonant for you, then that's something that you can make a change in your own personal life. But it's all nature. Everything that you can look at around us, everything comes from the earth. Every single little fiber in our couch or our television, and of course you've got more what I would call I don't want to I can say wild, but in reality a lot of the kind of like landscapes that we have, like bigger forests, and let's say like that aren't actually upkept by a council or anything like that, they aren't necessarily wild, because over the years there has been certain managements that have been put in place. So there's a bit of a controversy around this term, what is wild. But outside of that debate, let's just say more like untamed, freely growing landscapes versus the more urban landscapes, they're going to give you a different experience of nature. And I often say, and not to put it in such black or white, but I often say like the urban landscapes are more like a masculine experience of nature, because it's more ordered, it's more structured, it's more managed, it's more maintained, it's more contained. Versus when we go to a more wild landscape or untamed landscape, it's giving us the inherent chaos of the feminine. And we need both. Like, we benefit from both. So it's not to say that I've had many people comment saying, I feel like a bit of a fraud because I like going out in the wild, but then I like coming home to my cozy space. And it's like, that's totally fine. It's like, we actually are here to experience the diversity of all of it. For me, I'm more wanting you to have just those experiences so you know them. And it's not about having to choose only one type of thing. Obviously, you might feel more resonant in one or the other, but you're not necessarily missing out as long as you have the right perspective. The thing that I also tell everybody who lives in a more urban environment that maybe doesn't have access to those wild landscapes or is a long drive away is the number one medium of nature connection that I recommend everybody start with anyway is your relationship to light. Your relationship to light, and which is a form of nature, is the strongest governing force in your life. Every single cell in your body, every single function of your body responds to your relationship to light. And it's something that we've so forgotten, and it's something that's been heavily attacked in modern world. Think about, we are mostly under artificial lights, whether it be from our overhead lights in our house, we're looking at screens, we're looking at phones. We have this influence of these artificial lights that is actually causing us to feel more fragmented and more disconnected. If you just make very small changes to orient your life to more natural light and more natural light exposure, particularly going out as soon as you wake up, before you expose yourself to artificial light, going and having exposure to natural sunlight as much as you can, or if it's dark when you wake up, like when the sun comes up, just even have a lunch, like a little coffee break or something like that if you're at work, but go outside and get light exposure. And I think the kind of modern biohacking world has picked up on this, and that's really great that the conversation's getting out there, but it is so much more than that. There's a reason why every single culture around the world has a celebration of some variety, including our ancestors. If you're from more European countries, even if you're don't live in those countries anymore, but all of our ancestors celebrated these particular placements of the sun, things like the solstice, the equinox, celebrated certain cycles of the moon. They built temples, they built churches, they built shrines, they had gods and goddesses dedicated to these. There's a reason why humans spent literally decades building certain temples and statues dedicated to the sun. Why would humans dedicate decades of their time to build something to honor the light, to honor the sun, or to honor the moon? There's a reason for that. It's not just because it was looked pretty. It's because light has the most absolutely fundamental influence on who you think you are. There's a common saying in the kind of more spiritual space being like, oh, we are light beings. And for many, I don't think they understand the weight of that term. Like, it kind of sounds a little, oh, it's woo-woo. It's just like, we are light beings. So it's like, no, you actually are made of light. The plants that you eat, that the plants are basically alchemized or transformed sunlight into form. Every single one of your cells is receiving light from the sun and turning that into energy in your body. You are fueled by light. So when I say we are light beings, that's not just some flippant spiritual term. It's a matter of fact that we are light beings. And so our exposure to light and the kinds of light, because think about it, our body's constantly absorbing light, and that light is then being transformed by our mitochondria, these incredible little powerhouses in our bodies, that being transformed into mitochondria, that is fueling, it's giving energy to every single function in our body, including the functioning of our psyche, and therefore who we think we are, our mental state. And so if you're constantly only receiving artificial light from the computers, the overhead lights, the fluorescent lights, that is literally going to have an influence on who you think you are, your whole identity. Whereas if you're outside receiving that natural sunlight, the specific codes or the specific energy, let's just say, that's coming from the sun is going to have an influence on your consciousness. And that's why these cultures all around the world have understood that light isn't just something that feels nice on our skin. It's been associated with information. It's been associated with consciousness. And that's why these temples and shrines and things were dedicated to these very specific portals of light at the solstice and the equinox, because they knew that really honoring that and being present to it through ceremony and through the community coming together, it had a role on our consciousness, who we think we are, what kind of information that we have access to in this realm. And so, yeah, if you're in an urban environment, and that was a long spiel, but if you're in an urban environment, I would say if you just address your relationship to light, you would be far ahead in your nature connection than I think most people.
That's a good start.
Yeah.
And thank you for this spiel. That was incredible. I'm learning so much from you. Dr. Brittany, you're incredible. With you mentioned something really gut wrenching, like a little concerning. It's like if you have a lot of blue light and false light, fluorescent lighting, indoor lighting versus sunlight and natural light, you lose your sense of self. That's a little scary, a little bit, if you think about it, because a lot of us are having identity crises and feeling very disconnected, very lonely, very isolated. A lot of self-hate or self-criticism is really common right now. What when you say you lose touch with information when you don't have access to natural light, who is it that we could end up thinking we are in false light versus natural light.
Yeah, well, I would say you only have to look very far in terms of the amount of mental health issues where people have this really distorted perspective of themselves, this incredibly isolated version of themselves. And like, we only also have to look to social media to think if that's the only light exposure, like literally all that is. When you look at social media or Instagram or anything like that, it's just various light fragments that are coming towards us. Like, they might be an image, but the way that we can see the image is through light. And so that's going to be shaping your psyche. It's going to be influencing, through comparison, through all sorts of different shapings. And it makes you subject to, whoever's putting that out there, of how that shapes your perspective of the world. So, for example, instead of going out and exposing yourself to natural sunlight first thing in the morning, and instead you're putting on your TV and watching the news, that kind of light exposure, that source of light information is going to be shaping your worldview, your consciousness, and your sense of self versus had you gone outside in nature. And the most incredible thing is, I find so many people are going off and doing, ceremonies with like plant medicines or some kind of psychedelic to experience a level of connection where they feel incredibly disconnected. Maybe they are living in these more urban environments where they feel disconnected from nature or from their sense of purpose in the world or sense of community. Or maybe they feel unable to navigate some of the traumas that they've had in their past. And so they look to some of these plant medicines. And I'm not saying that they are bad or wrong. I definitely think that they have a certain timing and place, versus just going and handling them willy-nilly. Like all animate beings, which are expressed as in plants, require respect, and have their own will. But I was saying so many people are going off and doing these, where I've had consistently reported from people who just go and sit outside in the sunshine, like literally, obviously don't have your eyes open because it can cause harm. But if you sit in the sunshine, direct sun exposure, when it's early morning, you're not going to get sunburnt, so you don't have to worry about putting sunscreen or anything on. But let yourself just sit in the sun, and people often report these incredibly like psychedelic states. There's another practitioner called Dr. Azra, who is sharing his work in ecosomatics, and he calls it a biodelic state, which are these innate human states that we have to experience these kind of more psychedelic, psychoactive states where we receive these forms of connection, we receive these levels of information, knowing things that we were never taught. And it's simply through engaging these natural somatic pathways and engaging them with things like light, with things like water, with things like darkness. I was actually just talking about darkness yesterday on a course that I'm running, because equally these biodelic states that are available to us and these level of like shaping our consciousness through our relationship to light, equally it happens with dark. And people are becoming a little bit more familiar with this now with things like cave retreats and dark retreats, where they literally put themselves in a dark room. But these are ancient traditions, like Taoist traditions and Qigong traditions, spent years training and knowing how to circulate energy and qi in the body, so they would then eventually migrate or kind of master that skill and go into what's called the dark room. And in the dark room, when we have that level of light, when we're like reduce the amount of light and we're only exposed full dark for like many, many days at a time, what ends up happening is our brain, with that level of dark exposure, produces its own DMT and 5-MeO-DMT, which is the exact same molecule that is in ayahuasca. We produce it ourselves with nothing else required except darkness. So these states are actually possible within us, and they're facilitated by the natural world. It's just remembering how to access them. And, maybe you won't get to those states if you just sit outside under the stars at nighttime, but there's a lot of science to even say that when you do that, suddenly the mind starts to relax, because the increase of melatonin, when we have huge increase in melatonin through dark exposure, our cortisol, the stress hormone, starts to go down. Therefore, the monkey mind, the chatting starts to go down. And then we have these deep meditative states where we can similarly learn things we were never taught, access realms of information and knowing or guidance from the natural world that maybe not have been possible to us. And that's kind of like the 101 form of therapy and form of support that humans have been tapping into forever. That's probably like the biggest healing modality that I think is missing is actually people having that direct relationship to source, God, Mother Nature, whatever language you want to put it in, through their relationship to the natural world. And I think that's probably one of the biggest influences. People feel incredibly disconnected from God, source, the universe, whatever language you want to put to that kind of great spirit. And that's going to have a huge influence on your sense of self, your sense of belonging. Because if we don't have a sense of connection to something much bigger than us or why we're here, it drives people to do all sorts of really difficult things.
This is an important topic. It's
Mm.
reminding me of a project I was working on where I was making a relationship between the language used in laboratories for cell isolation and then community or individual isolation. And I just thought it was really interesting how much they aligned and how it aligns with what you're saying as well. Because in cell isolation, there's a very strict protocol to ensure that there's enough of a healthy enough environment for the cell to actually survive while you separate it from the community, in order to keep it alive. And I just feel like that's so similar to how our society's kind of gone. We're so disconnected, but we're just healthy enough to survive, but very disconnected.
It's true. And we've got to have these very controlled environments to be able to just survive. But yeah, that's what I notice.
Yeah.
And I think most of the time when I run programs, that is the biggest shift for people. It's like actually moving out of our survival physiology into, oh my gosh, like community, connection, sensitivity, because most of the time the reason why we're so numb and desensitized and disembodied is because everybody's just surviving. Where
Yeah.
most of society are in fight or flight without even realizing it, and because how else are we going to get through this very isolated existence where we're birthing children alone, or we're going through death alone, or we're going through grief alone, like where the village is not there to help raise our children, all these things. It's like, this is not how our bodies were like evolved the context to be in. It's not where our brains evolved to be in. And so people are just surviving, but it's kind of like the fishbowl that we're swimming in, and we just kind of normalized it, but it's really not normal.
No, I hear you. I think you're right, Brittany.
Yeah.
You're making me think about a common thing I hear from people is a lot of people are scared to feel or to kind of go into that calling inside of them to face themselves or to address something deeper, like an inner knowing. But a lot of people report to be terrified that if they do look at it or do kind of feel into their feelings or allow the sensations or the identification with like the experience going on inside of them, they fear they'll never come back or they'll die, or they'll get stuck in some crazy state. What do you, with your research and your background, do you have a name for that calling and then that fear to actually let it out and to feel it?
Such a good question. I'm really loving your questions. So, two things I want to talk about. One is what came through really strongly in my research was the necessity of grief and being open to grief and allowing grief to open us to experience the level of connection that we desire. Grief is like the gateway. And so in my research, what I found was there was always this intention to connect and to be open and to allow, in my experience, the land, the animate, to actually dance the body. But in order to facilitate that, I would hit this, what I call the wall of grief, and what is called the wall of grief by a mentor of mine called John Young. He's like an expert in nature connection and kind of one of the pioneers in this modern deep nature connection movement. because he also experienced this as well with all the people that he worked with, is suddenly support people to deeply connect again, and then everybody hits this wall of grief. And I've seen it time and time and time again with the people that I've worked with as well. It's like, oh my gosh, here's all the stuff that I haven't been willing to feel. Or as we start to denumb, here it is. And what I want to say is allowing that gate to open, allowing grief to essentially, for our heart to be broken open by it, is actually necessary for experiencing the level of connection that we desire. And I say, like, grief is the only force strong enough on the planet to open our hearts again where we've become incredibly closed. And I actually think of grief in this way, like a conscious ally. So it's not just an emotion. I feel like grief is actually this other force. And this is just my own interpretation of it too. But I really see grief as like this ally that assists us in evolving as a soul on this planet in this incarnation. Because when I've done a lot of work with people, when they have like suppressed emotions, all the way at the bottom, like underneath all of each layer of different emotion, it always grief at the bottom. And when they actually allow themselves to experience the grief, that's when transformation happens. That's when there's this real opening of the soul. That's when things really start to evolve in a person. And so I think it is key. It's an unavoidable aspect to our personal evolution, to reawakening this connection. But also, what I'll say too, because it speaks to the fear, is that so many people, I think it's across the board, everyone thinks, yes, but if I let myself feel that, I'm going to fall into the abyss and I'll never come out. And it is one of the traps of the mind. It's simply it's one of those things where I think most people are quite identified with their mind. They think their mind is them. We are not our mind. We are not our thoughts. Like we actually can be the observer of our thoughts. And this is taught through many, many different spiritual lineages around the world. Like ancient meditation lineages is recognizing that you can observe your thoughts. They don't necessarily belong to you, or they aren't you. And so in recognizing that, the mind loves familiarity. The mind loves the mind will choose a familiar hell than an unknown transformation. And so anytime you come close to a transformational experience, the mind will be like, wait a second, I would choose a familiar hell. And it will pull whatever levers or push whatever buttons is required for you to resist that. And I've experienced this so many times where I've, had a teacher visiting, for example, from across the world, and I've been waiting for them for months, and I've signed up to their program, and a week before going, my mind is like, oh, I'm just so tired. I don't know if I can go. I'm feeling really burnt out, blah, blah, blah. And if I had listened to that, like, I wouldn't have had these incredibly formative experiences that have shaped so much of my work. Not just through the things that I learned, but also just the embodied experiences that I had. And so the mind will absolutely kick up a stink and grab a hold when it knows change is coming. It's kind of like it has a tantrum when it knows its days are numbered. So that's been my experience, because when people do choose to open to that grief and let it open them, is that it actually becomes this incredibly inspiring force. And the work of Joanna Macy, in her work in I can't remember off the top of my head right now, but anyway, the work of Joanna Macy, she's done a lot of work in deep ecology, but she has written a lot about how grief actually becomes this inspiring force within us to create something of beauty out of it. And that was what my research found, is that I think grief is an unavoidable aspect of this human experience, because it is the catalyst through which we create beauty, through which we create new life. Think of every poem that's ever moved you, or every song that's ever touched something so deep in your soul, every business, every NGO, every one of those has grown from somebody's heartbreak. And it doesn't have to be this cataclysmic heartbreak. It can just be like, oh, my pain for the world, or my pain in this moment. I created my business. It's not coming from some savior complex, but it's like, wow, my heart breaks that that we're so disconnected, or that, and I know the feeling of that because that's how I grew up as well. And so that's inspired me to create something. Through my grief, I have created. And I think that's what actual grief is in service to, if we are willing to open to it and de-identify from the mind that's robbing us of our true creative potential in that regard. But the other side of it, the second thing, is I have also come to learn that there is a way that we can feel emotion that is what I would call like synthetic or like mental emotion versus the real deal, the true nourishing one. And so people talk about this of going, yes, but I have felt those difficult things I have faced, but it's just this loop. I keep going round on this loop. And I'm like, yes, you've entered the rabbit hole. And what the difference in that is for me, and when I'm working with people, is that because we have become so familiar with being disembodied, and that's often either from our cultural conditioning, from our family upbringing, from as a child. Let's say if you were as a child expressing an emotion and you got told that wasn't okay, or like just shush, or like stop crying, or whatever it was that you're expressing with your body. As a young child, we have no control in the same way that we do as adults to be able to suppress something. And so when we're like expressing our organic feelings as children, what that communicates when it gets shut down is your body is wrong. Your body is worthy of having you be disconnected, or like if you follow that natural impulse of your body, that somatic experience, you will be unloved and you will be ostracized. That's the messaging that happens. And so as a result, we have an entire culture of people who think they are feeling emotions, but they are literally thinking their emotions. They say, oh, I'm really feeling sad today. It's like, but they're not actually feeling the sadness. They are talking about feeling the sadness. And so as a result, we have people go into these states where I think I'm accessing this deep grief or this deep rage or whatever. But what's actually happening is that they're thinking about a story. They're thinking about something that catalyzes, that they know is like the button that they have to push to be able to access this emotion. And then in the thinking about the story and the ruminating, they create their own, like what I would call a synthetic emotion, by creating their own cascade of stress responses. Literally, they stimulate their own hormonal responses that then turns into a somatic experience. And then that keeps them cycling round. And they think they're feeling something because they're like, well, it's very real. Like I'm crying, I'm feeling, I'm doing this. It's like, yes, but you generated that whole thing from your mind. It was top down. And what I teach people to feel, which is like how to access the true alchemical potential of an emotion, is getting people to feel it bottom up. And what that looks like is, yes, we may have a story that catalyzes it, but go into the physical sensation. What's the physical sensation happening in your body? And often it's a lot more subtle. And the mind will want to jump to these stories. And it's like, no, just stay with the physical sensation. And as people allow the physical sensation to grow and expand, it naturally takes you on a pathway like a wave. Like you feel the peak as, it's the emotions coming up, the sensations are rising, and then you ride it, allow it to move through you like a wave, and then it comes down. The other, like you can also operate the other way, which is like it takes you down into the depths of your body, and then you move it as an expression, and then you naturally come up. This is how we're designed. It's like your body knows how to do this in the same way that you know how to go to the toilet. But what's happened is our mind has got in the way and says like, oh, I know how to do this because whatever family, we were raised in, or childhood we had, or culture that we're raised in, where that like capacity or that natural expression of the body, that natural intelligence was blocked, was stopped. And so the mind was like, well, I have to take over, and we do emotions from here now, which is in our mind. Mm. And when you remove that mind, it's actually a lot more gentle. And so when people work with me, they're like, wow, I had this whole fear that like I was going to go into this really exhaustive, cathartic thing. And it was so gentle and I feel so integrated and I feel so calm. And it's like, yeah, that's actually what true emotional alchemy can feel like. You don't have to go into the abyss. And the only reason we're doing that is because we're actually creating our own suffering by going mental track. But yeah, it's a whole area of my work that I guide people in. But that's just a little snippet. Is like I also understand why people are scared, because most people don't actually even know what a real emotion feels like.
And that's so true. And I could even relate. I need to work with you actually. Wow, Dr. Brittany, I could speak to you all day, but we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on. This has been so helpful. I've learned so much, and I know that everyone listening has learned a lot too. So thank you so much for coming on.
It's such a pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor. And I really appreciated your questions. They were so thoughtful and supportive. So I'm really grateful.